In this tutorial video, I'll be designing a little Mun lander to land you on the Mun. That will allow you to, gain science on the way in case you're in career mode. So what I'm doing here is I'm designing what the ship will look like when it lands back on Kerbin. I'm adding parachutes. I'll add a power source. I've added a Science Junior that you can use when you're on the Mun. I'm going to add 3 goo containers. I'll add all the little parts that collect science when you're on the Mun. Gravioli, seismic, and temperature. I kind of have a design in mind already, so I'm going to start building that out, but I'm going to use structural pylons as decouplers. And now I'm going to add some fuel tanks to them and some engines. I'm going to use a fuel duct to connect the middle tank to my engines. And what that will allow me to do is I'll be able to use up the fuel in this center tank, jettison it, and then use the fuel on the radial tanks. Maybe attach that. So this is essentially going to be what my Mun lander looks like. I got to add landing legs. I'm also going to add legs here, and the reason being is these are the legs that I'm going to use to land on Kerbin. These are the legs I'm going to use to land on the Mun. So for that in mind, I'm going to add these to a different action group. I'm going to name this Mun lander. Yeah, why not? I'm also going to add a little antenna. So if you're doing EVA or crew reports, you can send those home. EVA and crew reports you can send for full value, whereas soil samples and stuff like that you can't. Now I'm going to build out the stage that gets me into orbit, which I will have be really, really simple. There'll just be some SAS, then there'll be some jumbo fuel tanks. Let's make a lot of fuel. And then a liquid engine. Throw some struts on them so they don't split like a banana. Give the ship a quick once over. I think it's lacking lights. I'm going to add lights so that if you were to land on the dark side of the moon or Mun, you'd be able to. But I'm not going to because that makes my video harder to see. I'm going to fix some of the staging. So now, as it's staged, it will launch those, decouple, launch those, decouple the fuel, and then, of course, decouple everything in parachutes. And this looks good. So at this point, I'm just going to launch and try to launch as fast as possible. So now that this is loaded up, I notice it's nighttime. I'm just going to time accelerate until it's day so you can see it a bit easier. So here's my beautiful craft. And launch. And I will even time accelerate now. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get up to about 8,000 meters and then start to do my gravity turn. And I'm going to do my gravity turn using the orbit of Kerbin. So I'm going to rotate my ship 90 degrees, or 45 degrees towards 90 degrees, or towards east. So now I've hit 8,000. Start to do the gravity turn. And time accelerate again. Now at this point, I want to keep burning towards 45 degrees, or roughly 45 degrees, until my apoapse reaches over 70,000 meters, or 70 kilometers. It looks like time warping just flung my engine something weird, so I gotta correct that. There we go. Alright, so I'm about 85 kilometers up. I will cut my engines. I'll create a little maneuver to create a circular orbit around Kerbin. The thing here you have to remember is your periaps has to be above 70 as well. You can't just have an apoaps above 70. I'm going to line up for the next maneuver node, which is that blue crosshair there. And I'll probably have just enough juice left in the tanks in this first stage to get me into a stable orbit. So now I'll start that maneuver. Started a little early, but that's not a problem. And I'll just watch from here, and you can see that orbit starting to take shape. And I picked 90 degrees because it'll allow me to orbit around the equator, which is nice for landing on the Mun. So that's good enough. Periaps and apoaps above 70. And now to the Mun. I'm going to create a little maneuver node here, as you can see. Extend it out towards Mun's orbit. Like that. And now what I can do is I can drag it around until it lines up like that. Rather than calculating transfer windows, I'll just do it this way. So that looks pretty satisfying. Now I know I have almost no fuel left in these big tanks. I'm just going to use what's left to start this transfer to the Mun. But then I'll jettison it and start using my next stage. Jebediah, as usual, always looks very happy. So at this point, RCS might have been helpful, but I did without RCS, because that's another level of complexity that I can do without. Especially for this simple tutorial. So once I'm right over the maneuver node, I'm actually going to use warp to stop rotating my ship. It's a little trick that you can use. And time accelerate to the maneuver node. Now what this here looks like is the orange is my next maneuver. The purple is the change of sphere of influence when I get close to the Mun. And then the green is my orbit after my close intersection with the Mun. So now I just heard that my rockets burned out. I'm going to jettison them. And use my next stage. So I have to fix this maneuver a little bit. There we go. Just adding a little fix. So a difference of 13 meters per second, which is either I orbit Kerbin or I actually intersect the Mun. There we go. That looks good to me. Now I'll time accelerate until I hit the sphere of influence of the Mun. So I want to create a nice little orbit around the Mun. I'm going to do it around the periaps, like that. That looks nice, right? All right. So I'm going to line up my next maneuver. to create that orbit. And that's a nice, pretty, even non-eccentric orbit around more or less the equator of the Mun. It's not a bad orbit to be in when you're trying to land. Now, if you were in a highly eccentric orbit, it doesn't make the process of landing any difficult, but it does make landing in a specific spot a little bit more difficult. But this is just a video on landing on the Mun, not landing at a specific spot. So if you were collecting science, you'd start collecting science now. You would do an EVA report, send that home. You'd open one of these GOOT containment units, blah, blah, blah. Now I'm going to create a maneuver to land me there. Now I want to land on the light side. So as you can see here, this maneuver will allow me to land on the illuminated side of the Mun. I overshot it by a bit, but it doesn't really matter. It'll have the same effect. So there we go. Now I'm lined up to land just on the rim of this this crater here. And landing on the rim, believe it or not, is actually one of the trickiest spots, because that's where the slope is greatest, but I should be fine. So now I'm about 40,000 meters up. I'm going to kill all of my horizontal velocity. So the way I do this is I point away from that nav marker and burn until the nav marker is straight up and down on the tip of the nav ball. Now at this point I'm sure I've burned up all that fuel, and I have, so I'm going to jettison that off because it became dead weight. So there we go. Now it looks like all of my horizontal velocity is killed. My landing legs are deployed, and I'm coming in straight up and down to the Mun. And I'll accelerate a little bit more. So this is what we call a suicide burn. It's basically killing all of your vertical velocity kind of at the last minute. It is the most efficient way of landing, but it's also the most dangerous because you come in at really, really high speeds. So I'm not going to do a true suicide burn. I'm still a few thousand meters up, and I've killed most of my vertical velocity. And now is just about drifting to the surface until you want to kill the rest of your velocity. So here we go. I'm really close. I'm going to kill the rest of my vertical velocity here and turn on my lights. Lights, especially on the dark side, are very, very helpful, but even on the light side, they're a good gauge on how close you are. Either that or your shadow. And at this point, my shadow is not helpful because the sun is directly over me. So I can't really see my shadow getting closer. But I do see my lights at this point, so I know I'm getting really close. So this looks to be a pretty nice landing spot. It's nice and flat. If you have a really sloped or inclined place, you can just abort, use a little bit of fuel, blast off, and find a new landing spot. You really want to land at low speeds. If you go too fast, you could tip, you could bounce, you could break things. So here we go. Nice soft landing. Now is when you would do collecting dirt, planting flags, doing all your science, blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't really care about that. I care about a quick tutorial. So I'm going to blast off. Raise my legs. I'm going to bring my apoapse to about 30. Create a stable orbit. It's not the most fuel efficient way of getting home, but it is the easiest to show, which is why I'm doing it this way. Just create a little maneuver. That's going to be good enough. And accelerate. So now I'm in, obviously, a fairly eccentric orbit around the Mun, but it's good enough, and I'm going to create a maneuver, again, to get myself back home. And the way you want to do this maneuver is you want to create it so that your periaps are on the Kerbin is as little as possible. So as you can see right now, my periaps is 7.5. I'm going to create it so that it's 3.8. It's a bit better. 3.5. There we go. And you can just rotate this maneuver around the mun until you see a nice low periaps. And the reason for a low periaps is the lower your periaps, the less fuel it will take to land back on Kerbin. Line up my maneuver node, time accelerate once again. I've been doing a lot of that. And once I'm at the maneuver, burn. And I designed this little ship to have excess fuel, but I've not been trying to save fuel. And the reason is, if this is your first attempt to get to the mun, surely you will make some minor mistakes. You'll need to have extra fuel. So now I could create a maneuver to show me how I'm going to land, but I'm just going to burn prograde to lower my periaps. And I'm going to lower it until it's skimming the atmosphere, which will allow me to aerobrake. So now I'm skimming the atmosphere at about 20,000 meters. And believe it or not, I can actually, and I'll prove this, I can jettison my fuel. I no longer need to maneuver this ship anymore. So now coming into Kerbin, I'm going to, unfortunately, I'm landing on the dark side of Kerbin, which it is a little hard to see this. I can see that. I'll try to brighten it up a bit. But really, really shortly, my ship here will be more or less on fire, so it'll be easier to see. So here we go. We're going through the atmosphere, which will slow us down. As you can see, the surface speed is decreasing. Once I hit the denser part of the atmosphere, the surface speed decreases a lot. And at this point, I'm going to deploy my little landing legs. If you don't want to lose things like satellites, some communitrons, or solar panels, you would obviously retract them before entering the atmosphere. Now, as you can see, my surface speed is decreasing a lot. I'm going to actually time accelerate because this is not so interesting to look at, although it is pretty. And I'm going to keep time accelerated until I'm almost ready to land and just pop those parachutes. So here we go. I don't even really need to have lights to see where I'm going. I'm now only moving at about 130 meters per second. I'm gonna pop my parachutes. I'm not gonna time accelerate. Sometimes when you are time accelerating with when your parachutes pop, they'll kind of rip off. The physics calculates a little weirdly. And I am just about ready for touchdown. And that kind of concludes building a little craft to get to the mun and back. So I do hope it helped, and if you have any questions or comments or want any other videos, just please let me know. Thank you.